Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Swarley and Teddy Westside. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Life's Adventure by Mary Carmichael. 100 years in the making. Pick up the story everyone's afraid of and read Mary Carmichael's Life's Adventure. Welcome everyone to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we are filmmakers, storytellers, actors, a musician, producer, writer, director. We like to combine all of those things and then not use them at all as we talk about movies.
Yeah.
What's really cool, like it's been a really fun last couple of weeks. Like next week we have a really awesome episode that we'll tell you about more at the end of this episode. But there's just been a lot of inspiration that I feel like we've been digging up lately. And that's such a huge thing for artists. Like, I know the general attitude should be you show up to work and then the muse arrives. You don't wait for the muse and then show up to work. Like, you'll just end up without a lot of work at the end of the day because you're just constantly waiting. But if you show up and you put in the sweat equity, you know, eventually the muse shows up and you get inspired and then real magic fires off. But at the same time, if you can go in like full of gas and inspired, man, that takes you so far. It can change the direction of wherever you're headed, whether that's, you know, in your life, of course, but also artistically, and just feeling like, oh man, there's a new sound, there's a new idea, there's a new way to approach a creative act. And finding those moments, man, are just priceless. I don't know what else to really say about it other than, you know, I'm always on the hunt for something that is inspiring. I know that, you know, I've been an actor for, I don't know, good Lord, close to 20 years now. I haven't been as studious, you know, over the last few years, but, you know, I used to do a lot of workshops, and whether that was a one-off or, you know, just taking a class, acting class. But a lot of workshops, you know, would often be held by casting directors so that they could see what new talent they haven't discovered yet, you know, so that as they're looking at their new projects, they could be thinking about, oh, I saw that one girl, you know, and I need a really good 10-year-old for this whatever commercial about cereal. And so you go into these workshops and you hear them say the same thing every time. Every single time they get in front of the group, you know, whether it's, you know, 10 or 40 people or 200. I've been in all those circumstances. And they'll say, whenever you come in to audition for us, we are rooting for you. We want you to do good. We want to say, that's it. That's our person. Like, we've solved this problem. Like, they all say that. And as an actor sitting on in the seat thinking to myself, yeah, sure. Okay. You know, that sounds really nice until you have to go and actually be that person standing in front of you and delivering. And it took me a while because early in my acting career, like, I was just doing student films and creative projects, and then you get an agent, and then you start auditioning for, you know, those big casting directors. And now you're suddenly auditioning for like Toyota commercials and stuff that you really don't care about. Like, this isn't creatively fulfilling to smile and shake someone's hands and grab the keys. Like, that's not fun.
Done that.
But yeah, exactly. But it does pay bills, right? That's how, as an actor, you can build rapport with your casting director. But it wasn't really until I started doing my own castings when I would sit and bring in actors. And for me, that was a really refreshing experience to be on that side. One, because I knew what it's like to be that person auditioning. And so to finally have someone auditioning in front of me, I could give them direction that I might have wanted, give them an opportunity that sometimes I feel like maybe I didn't get. But then I also understood exactly what they meant whenever they said, we want you to do good, because it can be really exhausting going through casting and seeing people just kind of get up and go through the motions, or not provide a strong take, or maybe just not get the idea. And they're just off in la la land. Like, what did you prepare for? Like, this isn't that at all. And then having that person that walks in and crushes it, it is a sigh of relief. It's so like, oh my God, okay, this project isn't doomed to failure now. And I feel like watching people succeed is a dose of that. of seeing someone go through the trials and tribulations, and you're rooting for them to do good, even as someone who has no gain in that process now. Like we've been talking off air a lot about Arcane and the creative process that went into making that first season. And it's just so inspiring because you actually get a really good look at what those guys went through when they were creating this project and realizing the heart, the idea is there, but maybe we need a little help. And so they bring in a writing team, and there's like one woman that steps in to head up everything. It's like, I'm going to run this like a professional show, which it now is because I'm here, and then bring in other writers that can contribute. Like, oh, y'all are telling a story about these two women. Maybe we should bring in one or two women writers that can give you a different perspective. And suddenly, you had a writer's room and everyone contributing all these interesting ideas. And as an audience member watching this, I was just so excited to see people get it, to believe in a project that wasn't working yet, and then figure out, here's the plugs that we need to put in place to make this thing sing. It's so hard as an artist sometimes to find people that you can get inspiration from. Again, no benefit to me other than as an audience member. But I don't know. I'm always on the hunt for that. And I just have a lot of respect for now casting directors who actually are being honest. Like, they're really wanting you to succeed. And if you're an artist out there and you're feeling like you haven't found your moment or you haven't found your stride, like, I don't know about the rest of the world, but I assume I know I am, but probably most people are rooting for you to do well, and use that confidence, use the confidence of that reality to walk in without your shoulders slumped. Like, pin those puppies back, poke your chest out, have some pride, take a deep breath, and do it from your gut, because we're all rooting for you.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I haven't actually looked at it that way too. I have seen, there have been some big actors who say, like, when their big shift happened, when instead of going into an audition, concerned that am I the right fit for the part, they go in with just, I'm going to do my job. My job is to go in and act right now. I get to act in front of people. That's it. I get to do my thing in front of 4 people who are, who, it doesn't matter how big of a job it is or whatever. I just get to do my thing. I'm asked, hey, can you come act in this room for 7 people for 3 minutes? Yes. Okay, cool. And that's when their shift, happened. And these are like big actors that have said this. Multiple actors have, but that's a really interesting perspective that I had never thought about, which is that everybody is rooting for you, kind of. Like, it's so easy to see the world as everyone's trying to get their own and out there to, trying to make it happen. And they are, everybody has their own goals and aspirations that they're all trying to hit. But I really think you're right that, like, most people don't want to see other people fail. Mm. I mean, if it's me and you going up against each other for the same gig, yeah, I hope I get the gig. But 9 times out of 10, when you see somebody has gotten a gig that you didn't audition for, you're pretty happy. Yeah. You're like, oh, you know what? He's great for that role. I'm so glad he got that. Or she's great, and I'm so glad she got that. Especially like these big roles. But anyway, I never thought about it like that. And I think that that's really super important to remember, that the world isn't always against you. It's just you don't see it for you all the time. You don't see everyone rooting for you, because what are they going to do? Like, call you up and say, hey, I'm rooting for you? Like, they don't all have your number. But I think most people would say, man, congratulations. That's so cool that you got that, So anyway, yeah, that's a smart way to look at it.
I always feel that way whenever I see someone doing well, whether I'm a personal fan of them or not. Like, I try to let them know, awesome, way to go, I'm rooting for you, whether we're close or not. Like, I have colleagues or whatever, peers here in Austin, they get into a big festival. I'm stoked for them. Like, I'm still waiting for my moment to have that. And that's okay. but I'm still rooting, and it's not bitter. It's not like, oh, that should have been me. None of that, man. I'm just so excited to see people do well because it's so hard creating, putting yourself out there. It's impossible. So we need to be rooting for each other. Why not? Uh, yeah. So speaking of stepping in the ring and giving it your all, what are we covering today, man?
Perfect. Today we are covering Gladiator II, which is out in theaters as we were recording this. So if you haven't seen the film, please pause the episode and go watch the movie. We don't want to spoil anything for you, and we will if you haven't seen it. So,
yeah, we'll cover a couple things. We'll look at some of the story and writing, talk about sequels. We'll also talk about some cinematography. There's a thing or two I learned about how Ridley Scott works that we'll throw around and see if there's anything there, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. After his home is conquered by the tyrannical emperors who now lead Rome, Lucius is forced to enter the Colosseum and must look to his past to find strength to return the glory of Rome to its people. It's directed by Ridley Scott, screenplay by David Scarpa, cinematography by John Mathieson, featuring Connie Nielsen as Lucilla, Paul Mescal as Lucius, Denzel Washington as Macrinus, and Pedro Pascal as Marcus Acacius.
Okay, Todd. So before we even get deep into it, I was anticipating walking in. We speak next week a little bit about Hans Zimmer and the impact the first Gladiator had on scoring and music. And so walking in, I was anticipating another Hans Zimmer score, and he wasn't on here. So I was a little bummed on that. Like, I'm sorry, I don't know who actually scored this, and they did a fine job. I'm not trying to take away them, but that did knock me down a little bit. I don't know if you walked in hoping or expecting another Hans banger, but that happened for me. So feel free to touch on that, as well as sequels are hard. How did Gladiator 2 live up to its original, possibly top 10 movie of all time expectations?
Yeah. Sequels are hard. So I saw a lot of stuff behind the scenes of like everybody screaming about this is the best movie of the year and all this stuff, like. And so I think it might have blown it out of proportion for me, maybe a little bit. I feel like this was good. I don't know. It was good. Okay. It was good. Was it Gladiator? No, not in any stretch of the imagination for me. I thought that obviously anytime Denzel Washington is on screen, he brings it. I mean, he, for me, was fantastic in this. I think one of the reasons why I love him in this movie is because it feels like when he's performing, it feels like a play. Mm-hmm. It feels like he's on stage, and you could just let the camera roll and let him do the entire movie, and he would probably like deliver in spades every single line. He's just, that level of actor. He's just fantastic. I thought Paul Mescal was good too. There's a scene right after that you showed where he does this kind of speech to the other gladiators. And I think it kind of encapsulates for me kind of the feeling that I had throughout the movie. Because is this delivery bad? No, it's not bad. It's pretty good. But it's the camera movement, is the placement and the angle and the even the lens, I noticed, was like, it just felt like I was seeing too much of the screen. Right. And so because of that, I wasn't locked into him in his presentation of this speech. And I think that the story itself, there's a lot of stuff going on. I wasn't fully in love with his character and his wife enough. It went straight from them being together and him hugging her to them being in battle, basically. And without, I didn't have enough connection between them. So I didn't, obviously he's going to be upset if he sees her die. But if you go back and you watch Gladiator 1 and you watch his reaction to his wife, to seeing his wife, and we don't even see his wife dead, right? We just see her feet. It is visceral. And you don't get that same sense here for many reasons. I think one, we don't spend enough time with them together. Two, there's no, we don't see her after. There's a long time between when she dies and him discovering her body, right? And so there's a disconnect there. And then also, I feel like the story is a little bit disconnected. There's a lot going on, from the two emperors to Lucilla discovering that Lucius is that's her son, to her being involved with Marcus as well. And the one thing I did really love about this, I mean, I loved a lot about it. I'm not trying to tear it down, but one thing I really loved about the story was Marcus's arc. He's there to, he is a general there to conquer lands, and you can see on his face from the very beginning, he's like, I don't want to do this. I am only doing this because it is my job, and because this is what I do. But I don't like our emperors, and I don't like killing and destroying for the sake of just expansion. Like, obviously, if someone is coming in trying to hurt Rome, I will defend Rome, but and kill for that. But going out and just conquering lands for the sake of doing it, you can tell right away he doesn't want to do that. So when he orders his the wife to be killed and she's shot, obviously Lucius is mad at him, but you see his arc, and then at the end he basically sacrifices himself for Lucius, or not the end of his life, he sacrifices himself for Lucius, and you can see that kind of arc, and that I think still was done. That could have been the story. That could have been the entire story for me, and it would have been much more impactful. I think there's just too much going on, too much happening, and they harken back to Gladiator 1 in a few ways. Him grabbing the dirt and stuff, but the ending was just what? Where he says, "Father, speak to me," and then we basically, we cut to the hand going through the wheat, and then that's it. I mean, that doesn't really give me anything. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that shot. Now what? Oh, nothing. It's over. And so really, what I would have done was to take this one idea, which is different than any other idea that you had in Gladiator 1, which is the arc of Marcus. That would have been much more interesting to see him be the real bad guy. He's never really a bad guy. You see at the beginning, he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to take over this town. But to see him go from being a terrible person to being a loving person, and then sacrificing himself for Lucius at the very end, would be really cool. It was good to see Denzel have a fight scene, but it was of course he was going to lose. Yeah. Come on. He's like 70 years old, and he's fighting a guy, a quarter his age or a third his age, who has just bested all of the best gladiators in the Colosseum. Of course he's going to die. Give me a break. And then the speech that Lucius gives right after that, it's just, I see too much. Get me a close-up of his face. I want to see the emotion on his face. I want to see the acting. I don't want to hear it. I want to see it. And I didn't get that. And that was direction for me that felt like it kind of fell flat a little bit. So I would give this probably a 6 out of 10. I think that it's wonderful to see on a big screen. The shots of the Colosseum are fantastic. I loved the fight scene where they had water in the Colosseum. where they filled it with water. I loved it because they did that. That was like a real thing that they actually did. And just to show that, it just took the whole thing up a whole nother level. The fight sequences up a whole nother level. Some of the editing felt weird in that, with the ships, but for the most part, I was in it because it was just so cool that they showed that and did that. I liked that the bald guy, the announcer guy.
Yeah.
Okay. He's from the first few seasons of a Great British Baking Show.
Oh, I've never seen
the Great British Bake Off. He's like one of the main hosts of that show. I remember because I was watching, I was like, I know that guy. How do I know that guy? I know that bald head. And then about halfway through, I was like, oh, I know where he's from. He's from that show. So I don't know. That was cool to see. Good job getting getting another gig. That was awesome. So yeah, I think there was just too much story happening. It would have been nice to boil it down to something new and interesting. I think we all kind of knew that. I assumed that this character, that Paul Mescal's character, was going to be Maximus's, or like the son, or not Maximus' son, but the Lucilla's son. I assumed it. So that's fine. That's great. Carry on the lineage, kind of like storyline. But I just needed something. I needed a new story grounded the entire time, and I didn't really fully get it. So anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts.
Well, you're much kinder than I am. I hated.
Okay.
This was not fun for me at all. I went in a blank slate. I didn't see any previews. In fact, the first trailer I watched was just a couple minutes ago, before we jumped on, just so that I can see the trailer and see if there's anything we could use in there, and refresh my memory, because I only watched it once. I just wasn't going to sit through it again.
And by the way, before you keep talking, I want to say to all our listeners, Wes and I did not talk about we don't talk about what we think about movies before we come on here. So I could love it, and he could be like, dude, what are you seeing? Or vice versa. So the fact that like I'm having problems with it, and now I hear that he has, this is legit. This is not, us getting together saying, okay, what'd you think? Okay, this is what I think. Now let's make sure we agree. No.
Yeah, we discover this in real time. So,
yes.
Yeah, I thought, so many things. One of the first things that struck me is how flat a lot of the acting came off. It felt like rehearsals. It felt like we kept watching a dry rehearsal table read for most of it. Denzel still sparkles because he's Denzel. But even some of his performance didn't feel grounded with everything else happening, just because the writing, I think, didn't really bolster it. And it goes to a lot of what you were saying about, like, you didn't feel any kind of connection with Lucius and his wife. It just kind of flies by, and it felt very forced. Like, oh, you see a guy and a girl kiss and say they love each other and exchange rings, and like the emotional buy-in's there, right? Like, we're done. Our work is done, right? We saw it. Okay, so everyone's going to be heartbroken when she dies here in a minute. And it's just more than that. Like, and it's a fascinating comparison that you made with the first Gladiator, because you're right. We never hear her say a word. And yet we viscerally understand how Maximus is absolutely going to destroy whoever did that. Like, that's never even a question. And it comes down to performance, as well as, just the buildup. Like, what made the first movie sing so much is how much they didn't need to say out loud. This Gladiator II is just full of exposition dumps. Like, okay, now we've done some action, and now let's hear, your story, a little bit more of your story. Oh, this guy's not saying everything. He's got more to tell. We'll hear that later. And it just kind of keeps building in that way of, oh, here's some action, here's some exposition, here's some action. And the first Gladiator was dovetailing those throughout. Like, we never needed to hear how Commodus was a bad guy, and hear and understand all of his faults plainly expressed. Like, we got a really strong sense of that through the sequencing of events, and also watching him work and watching how everyone responded to him. Like that's all ingrained within the scene work. So that whenever, he's finally announcing his shortcomings to his father right before he kills his dad, he's like, all your virtues are, I'm not on any of those virtues lists. Like, but I have other virtues, father. Like, I am okay. I'm a man. Like I'm someone worth, understanding and loving. And his father has that breakdown of like, your shortcomings as a son are my fault and my failures as a father. Like that's so poetic and it's so gripping. Even talking about it, you can hear and feel the rhythm of that scene playing out and how it seamlessly transitions into murder. Like it never felt herky-jerky. It never felt clunky. And Gladiator II is full of clunk. And so, but in Commodus, like you're watching him show up after the battle, and then you're watching him choreograph a fight and winning this choreography. Like, as opposed to watching Maximus, like, nearly die, nearly get killed, and seeing his men come to his rescue, and also him saving his men. Like, it's so symbiotic of them taking care of each other, as opposed to Commodus being served and having his beautiful tent, and trying to ingratiate himself to the Senate, and to Maximus himself, and so you get a really strong visceral sense of who these characters are without any of them saying it, and then you see how every moment builds on top of each other and create this sense of compulsion, and that just propels you through the story. So that as Maximus is scared to death that he's not going to reach his family in time, of course he doesn't. And that hope is fully realized. And that's why we viscerally feel it with him. It's because we're hoping to see them. And then when we get there and see his fields are burned and see his son is dead in the road, like it's all completely heartbreaking. And then here it's just event after event after event. None of it really ties and connects together. People just kind of die. Like we're starting to build a little bit of a relationship with his general at the very beginning, right? Lucius is connecting and like trying to patch up his general, like, oh, your arm's messed up. Let me heal you. And then his guy just lays down literally and dies in an arena, killed by those apes or monkey baboons or whatever. Like he literally just gives up. Like this was going to be like our Jaman Hansu, like this was going to be our guy that we go to battle with, and he just falls down and dies.
That's a great point.
What are we doing? How wasteful this movie is. And same thing whenever like Acacius was absolutely the most interesting character in this movie, because to your point, he doesn't want to be doing this. It's all resistance. And it's interesting to use him as a pawn in this bigger scheme by Macrinus, but ultimately he just kind of dies. It's not poetic.
I was like, oh, that's it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because you have this defiance of the twin emperors, right? The Caesars, commanding his death, and then but there's nothing at stake for them. They can just kind of do what they want. Commodus was constantly trying to appease the crowds because he understood that's where the real power was. Like, if I don't appease the mobs, I'm next. Like, we've seen this happen before, and you need to respect the power of the people. And here, there was none of that. There was no sense of we're teetering on the edge, and everyone is competing for power. That whole first movie was about competition for power and desire for power and how it destroys and corrupts you. That's the entire movie. It's battling for that whole, the future of Rome is at stake. And who's going to have that power? And so you can see Maximus resisting it, which is ultimately the kind of person you want to have the power. And then you can see the people who are competing for it, and you're like, those are the exact people you don't want to have it. So how do we right this ship? And that's a balancing act that the movie was just walking the entire time, and that kept you on the edge of your seat. Like, will this person who's destined to be powerful, and to see that all kind of upset and the tables turn in the opening text scrawl was really disheartening for me, because it basically said everything that you saw in the first movie doesn't count. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Oh,
just
great
kind of
point.
threw it all away. Like, oh, guys, turn the car around. What are you doing? That was upsetting. And so they were already like pushing me away from the whole narrative by saying the first movie didn't count. And then I really hated the Maximus as the father bit. Like that felt so false to me. It felt very cloying and clingy of like love me kind of attitude, because it doesn't speak to Maximus's character. Like, look, it's one thing to kind of extricate yourself from the movie and be like, well, in Roman times, people kind of slept around and did what they wanted. Okay, sure, but that wasn't Gladiator. Like, it has to still be true to the story you're continuing. And it just isn't. That wasn't Maximus's character. And Lucius was about the same age as his son. So what you're effectively saying is that that wife that he was just hell-bent on avenging, he cheated on her with Lucilla. And they had a kid out of wedlock and out of this. And it just felt completely false. You could have told most of the same story with just Maximus being this like father-like figure and this inspiration of I saw something that meant something to me, and I caught a vision of Rome, and here's where it went wrong. And then for Lucius to then kind of grow up and to resent his mom, I thought that didn't make any sense. Like she finally gets in the same room with him and he acts like he doesn't know her. That didn't really jibe at all with the story they were telling. It felt forced. And
also the hug too, when finally he loved her, felt forced too.
What are we doing? It was really disconcerting. And I think you're absolutely right. There was just too much story they were trying to tell. And if they had boiled it down and streamlined it and said, this is going to be a story about Acacius, and how maybe initially he did try to kill Lucius. And then as he grew in power and stature and understanding of the toll of war, I was wrong. And now I have to atone my sin. That would have been a much more interesting story to tell, and they didn't tell it. We never got a sense of who Acacius really was. He was just someone that loved Lucilla and maybe loved his men and maybe hated and despised war for reasons we don't really know or understand. We just kind of get the battle-weary sense because Pedro Pascal is a king, and he can just sell anything.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the boilerplate. Like I could definitely, I think especially if I had watched it one more time, I could pick this apart beat for beat. But I think the writing just really needed a different way. And I felt like they just said, if we're going to make a Gladiator sequel, we need to make Maximus the center of this thing somehow, some way. And the best and easiest way to do that is to make Lucius his son, which was never hinted or implied in the first film. I mean, I watched it a couple months ago just because I felt like watching it, and I didn't get that sense. It's just a wrong way to approach this story. And I was more than happy to go and see a Gladiator sequel. The paradox to me is that they had 25 years to write the sequel.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I was just going to say this. Yeah.
And yet the first Gladiator wasn't finished writing even as they started shooting. Like
they had 21 pages.
Really?
They had 21 pages for the first movie. Russell Crowe has said in interviews, like,
wow.
Like there were okay. So that scene in the first one, we're going to talk about the first one for a second. That scene in the first one where he discovers his wife. I saw an interview where he said that scene, we just see these feet right in the shot. Those feet to him, like what he's seeing as an actor, are just like these feet nailed to a board, right? It's just like whatever that are hanging there. And Ridley said, just fall to your knees and react. And what he said was, no, I have to go to them, Ridley. And he said, no, it's going to look ridiculous. He goes, Ridley, I need to do this take. I need to go to them. I failed her once. Not going to her would fail her. I get emotional thinking about it. Not going to her would fail her again. And I would not do that as Maximus. So that's this, and they did one take, and that's the take you see with snot coming down and where he goes to the feet and he's just like touching them. That is story, man. And that wasn't on the page. There was no page. I think Gladiator is 90% Russell Crowe and 10% Ridley. I love you, Ridley. You're a genius. You're a genius. But without Russell Crowe in that first one, you do not have a movie. Because what Russell did is he took those 21 pages and he gave you a freaking story. He gave you a story that was singular focused, which is everyone around me is an extension of me and I'm an extension of them. And we have one goal: to kill this MFer who killed the only thing that mattered to me in this world. That's it. That's the story. So you don't need 90 pages. You just need 20. And then what would you do as Maximus? I would go to her. That's going to take another minute of runtime. I would have, and then, chaos ensues.
Yeah.
But it's just brilliant that you have someone investing so much into this, and then you have the brilliance of Ridley to say, okay, I trust you, let's do this, kind of thing. He also is famous for saying that the scene of him at the, I don't know if I look at interviews all the time of actors. Oh, never? Okay. He said that Russell was in an interview and he said that scene where he's at the battlefield and he like sees a bird.
Oh, you did send me that clip.
I sent you that clip, right? Oh yeah, that's right. A while back.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And describe it, because Ridley goes to him and says, and you see a bird and you watch the bird and it drifts away and then your attention slowly comes back to the battle. And they show you it because the bird wasn't there. They had to grab that shot later. But if you just watch Russell Crowe's face as he's going through these motions, there's a lightness that comes over him as he sees this bird, and it settles and it sits. He just kind of follows it up into the air and he lets his attention move towards the camera down looking at the battle. And then it hardens. Like you see this beautiful transition, and it's a physical one, but you understand everything that's happening in that moment. It's so cool.
It's so cool. And that came from Ridley. Like that was what he wanted. But then Russell freaking gave it to him, right then. And then Ridley goes, you and I are going to, what did he say? You and I are going to do just fine, mate, or something like that. But that just goes to show you, like, you have an actor like Russell Crowe, who will, or Jack Nicholson, right? Who will give you more than what's on the page. You have some actors who will just take what's written and give you what you wanted without you even knowing what you wanted or needed, for the story. I don't think we necessarily had that in this film. I think in particular, I gotta say, Connie Nielsen's performance is just not good. It's just not. I don't know if it's directing or what, but it just felt flat to me.
This is my feeling with pretty much everyone except Denzel. Everything felt really, really flat. And I think that comes back to the writing, because Connie Nielsen is amazing. And seeing her on screen again after 20 some odd years, I'm like, where's she been? People have not been utilizing Connie Nielsen. But I think it is the writing. I think it's the writing and maybe a little bit of the directing, from the standpoint that I was talking to, and this goes into the cinematography, but I was talking to a gaffer who worked a Ridley Scott project, and there was this little workshop, and there was 10 of us huddled around listening to him talk about working with Ridley Scott. And he's like, the way he was working, like he had, I forget if it was like 5 or 6 cameras. And, we would light for all these cameras to do this one continuous take of, someone, having a conversation or, transitioning, arriving and walking into a building. And we just did it all as one shot. And we would stage cameras all around. And I kept waiting for him to pause long enough so that I can be like, hold on. When you say 5 or 6 cameras, like camera teams, or like, do you mean he had like a couple crash cams where you'd set up and, you know, as they walked by, it just kind of caught an angle. And he's like, no, like 5 or 6 full camera teams. I'm like, what? That's a lot of cameras. Like, you do that for action sequences, and Ridley Scott's doing that to capture some dialogue. And so he would do like, you know, 1 or 2 takes and then move on. And so I wonder how much of that really impacted so many things, because the Ridley Scott of old, right, the Alien, the Gladiator, Ridley Scott was thinking through every single shot from the perspective of, you know, 2 cameras, 1 or 2 cameras, and thinking through, what is this moment? What are we trying to communicate? How can we make it look amazing? And now trying to light for 6 angles is madness. Like, you're going to lower your contrast because you can't really perfectly light for every single angle. And that means more broad general lighting, which can work. It just kind of depends on the story you're telling. Like Napoleon, I kind of struggled with, and I wonder if this is part of the reason why, now that I know that he likes to work with a lot of cameras. But I'm also thinking, like, performance wise, normally you save your juice for the close-ups. Like, a lot of these classic actors are used to, okay, we're going to capture the master shot, like this really wide angle. And the saying used to be, you save it for the close-ups, so that you're in the master, you're just working through the blocking and the scene, like, okay, yeah, kind of going through the motions. And then as you work your way closer and closer and closer, you get your mediums, you get your close-ups, and maybe a specialty shot. Then you can really start to put the juice on. You've kind of worked through the kinks, you know, hopefully you've got to rehearse a little bit before any of that. But then even as you're working through it, like, you're getting to the good stuff. And if you're just running these once or twice, there's some actors you're going to get greatness out of, and that's just how they work. Joaquin Phoenix does not rehearse. He's just going to give it to you. Like, you start going from the first take. But maybe other actors don't work that way. They really need to warm up to the material and warm up to their co-stars, their scene partners. And so I don't know if it's just this bad combination of a dozen things clashing, of maybe Paul Mescal really needs to warm up to his scene partners, and maybe he needs to warm up to the material, because I thought this was the worst thing I've seen Paul Mescal do, and I love some Paul Mescal. Give me normal people, give me all the strangers. Like, that guy is talented. After Sun, get out of here. He's amazing. And so I don't know if maybe this just isn't his kind of story, or if he just needed more rehearsal or warming up to the material. He felt out of place for me in this film. He didn't seem to fit the material at all. And I think the better scenario is a tighter script. Definitely not 2.5 hours. This probably could have been 1 hour and 40. Tighten it up, and just a complete rewrite. Kill the whole father-son thing. Maybe a lot of the exposition probably could have left. There's just so much that just really didn't work. It just didn't feel connected at all. And like, one moment didn't seem to necessitate the moment that followed. Whereas the first film was dominoes falling. Everything was pushing the next moment into the next. And then on top of that, this is really more this. Now, if you really want to say I'm being a jerk, fine. Before the movie even started, they did the introductions of like, hey, thanks for watching the movie. We don't need that. Like, just
please stop that.
Stop.
All of you out there, Hollywood, please stop that stuff. That's just, I don't need to see you
to watch
before.
Characters on screen, and then whenever you show me actors,
exactly,
I stop thinking Denzel is Macrinus. I'm now thinking about Denzel the performer. I'm thinking about Pedro Pascal instead of Marcus Acacius. Like, stop doing that. The only time it made sense to me was Tom Cruise saying, "What you're about to see is real."
Yeah.
Don't blink.
Yeah.
That's awesome, because now I'm looking at what's happening on screen differently, because there's these stunts and stuff happening that I'm like, oh my God, like that's tension because I'm thinking about them risking their lives or whatever. Like, actors standing in front of me saying that we're actors is a really bad move before I watch them act.
Yeah, and you know, it's a good point about the Tom Cruise thing, because Tom Cruise is always Tom Cruise. Like, in any role that he does, you can't not see Tom Cruise, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing. You know, I like seeing him in, you know, in the Mission Impossibles and all of the stuff that he does. But this is a period piece. This is like an old Rome piece. So seeing people in sneakers and jackets, you know, and stuff beforehand completely takes me out of it. You know, like it. That's a great point. I didn't even think of that, but I did feel like now that you mention it, at the beginning of this, when that happened, I did feel like, oh God, you upended me, you know, a little bit. Like, oh, I was ready for this thing, and now I'm just like, oh God, I just saw Pedro Pascal. Oh, now I'm thinking Last of Us, or I'm thinking, you know, like all the other things that he's done, but he's a human being and he's alive still and he's there. Okay, now shift my brain into thinking now he's, you know, 200 AD, you know, Rome. Okay, all right, but yeah, but you're right. Like the Tom Cruise thing, that's different, because whether he's in Top Gun or Mission Impossible, he's always Tom Cruise, and I know what I'm getting. You know,
100%. It's just, yeah. I think there's just so much more that could be done to make this a more cohesive story that pulls you in, and I felt like they did everything to make you. They thought that you wanted to see. And instead of let's tell an honest story, they said, what does everybody want to see in a Gladiator sequel? Oh, they want more Maximus. How can we get more Maximus? Yeah, let's give them more Denzel. And it's like, man, just tell the story. Let us be consumed with another fight for power, whatever that means, whether it's Acacius. Now you have someone that you actually want to deny power. You have someone in power that is trying to give it up. That's a really cool inversion of the first film, of someone who doesn't want power that we need to push into power. Now you have someone with power who's trying to figure out a way to get out of it. Like, that's a really cool approach to telling a story, and they just botched it. And the execution was just all wrong in this film for what they were thinking, possibly, if we're being charitable. And there were some good ideas that was just poorly executed. But I think the best ideas they didn't even attempt to explore. Yeah. So 2 big thumbs down. I would give it a 5 out of 10, which isn't too far off of what you were thinking. But I will never. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever watch this again. It was just.
Yeah, I think I need to wash my mouth out with Gladiator 1.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
It's like, it's just so beautiful. Their characters are so rich because there's so fewer characters to be stretched thin over. Like this were secret meetings and more secret meetings, and then that secret meeting was a subversion of that other secret. It's just, at what point have we had too much? And then we're watching these 2 brothers get ripped apart that we hated to begin with. Yeah.
But this, okay, so you bring up the brothers, and this is another thing that like was super annoying to me. In the first Gladiator, we hated the Emperor, like hated him because of how much power he had, and the he was just evil. You could tell. These are just annoying. They're like you know, these children who they're like children with a magnifying glass and everybody else is ants. They're just annoying. It's not that they really have power. Anybody could kill them at any time. But the Emperor in the first one, it did not feel like that at all. It felt like this guy was strong and powerful and could beat 9 out of 10 people in the ring himself. Like he you know, and then we get these like wussy brothers who are just, you know, kind of figureheads, you know, who have zero redeeming quality about Rome at all. They're just consuming, you know, and it's why paint the Emperor in such a bad, or not bad, but such a weak light, They were weak. And in fact, the strong brother dies first. What? What? I don't, it was, I question pretty much every decision, I guess, and now that I know also that it's reciprocated in what you think, I'm like even more so thinking, oh, yeah, I mean, maybe I am being a little gracious. I don't know, but
It's sketchy. Yeah, that I think the goal was to be poetic about Macrinus's, usurpation, right, and rise to power. But there was just nothing poetic about it. Nothing felt inevitable. It all felt kind of slapdash and moment to moment. You couldn't see the end coming, or not even see it, feel it. It's
yeah,
one thing to be like, oh, this is a predictable movie. That's not what we're talking about. We're like, but there's an emotional pull that you can see the direction that something's going. Commodus in the first film, we saw the ways that he was abusing his power, and we saw how he was hated, and how inept he was. Like everything his father was afraid of was being realized, and we didn't know whether or not our guy that we're rooting for was going to be able to do anything about it because his circumstances were so bad. Like this guy was chained up every night. Like what could he possibly do? And so we saw the fight that Maximus had to endure for a place that he didn't even care for. And so you gave Maximus all these other externalities to care about. What happens to Lucius? What happens to Lucilla? What happens to his friends? And most importantly, he didn't care for his own life. And now that made it so much more dangerous. What's going to happen to Maximus? Because the thing that we cared about, he didn't care about, his own safety. And so there's so much tension that you create out of that moment to moment, you just don't know what's going to happen next. Even if emotionally, this can't end any other way than him coming out on top. You don't feel emotionally safe at all. It's a beautiful, beautiful tension that was just fraught the entire film. And this one had none of that.
You just said something that blew my mind. The thing that we cared about, he didn't care about. And that's what made it dangerous. I've never heard that before. That's usurping the expectation and the desire of the audience.
Yeah.
We want Maximus to be safe, to live, but Maximus doesn't care about living. In fact, he wants to die, but he wants to die killing this MFer. That's brilliant storytelling.
Yeah.
That is, I'm invested because I care and I really want this thing to happen, and I'm going along with it even though I have a feeling it won't. That's awesome. So, yeah, you're right. And none of that existed in this at all.
It sucks. I think from the beginning, everyone was like, don't do a Gladiator sequel. And, we got it 20 some odd years later with a really strong idea of make it about Lucius, and then just kind of fumbled the whole thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe don't do a Gladiator sequel. But so it goes. I mean, sequels are hard. Figuring out how to honor an original film, especially something that was so specific as the first Gladiator, because it's all about being in the ring, and coming up and finding a way to put someone that we care about back in the ring that is still tied to the first film. That's hard, but it's just crazy to me that they had all the ingredients there, and instead of, they just made the wrong meal altogether.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
They made goulash.
They made goulash. That's a good way to put it. I don't think, I mean, the Colosseum existed for so long. So many people died. There were so many stories that could have been told. It did not have to involve directly Maximus. It just didn't. It could have been a whole new story, right? Not connected to him at all. And if it was done in the same, a similar way, right, where we are telling this emotional human story instead of trying to relate it back to something that was already told, and basically telling the same story. Have a wife dies, I'm mad, I go kill a bunch of people, that's not it's a recipe for disaster. And then why you brought up that in the first one that Maximus is like he's locked up in his cell all the time, like constantly. He has no comforts, creature comforts at all. And yet after the first little battle in the emperor's chamber, the next scene we see Macrinus talking to Lucius while he's in a bath. He's like in a hot tub.
Right.
Like, what the heck am I looking at? Is he a prisoner? Is he a slave or is he not a slave? Like, pretty sure he is a slave and he is your instrument, Macrinus. So I guess he's taking care of him, because he's going to be battling maybe, but.
And I wonder how much of some of this was just, oh, well, the first Gladiator got so many things of wrong about how gladiators lived. Let's try to right that ship. But there's a reason, and I have no idea like how good or bad gladiators were treated. So I'm totally speaking out of my neck. But assuming that is a possibility, there's story needs. You don't do those things for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. I want to feel imprisoned with Lucius. I want to feel like I can't go anywhere. It felt like he had his run of the place, and then he makes friends with the guy who is, I guess, the jailer and has the keys.
Oh, right.
Who like gives him the keys as he runs off to go get the army. Which, by the way, it was daytime when he rode off to go get that army. So and then he brought the army back. So that must have been pretty close by.
I felt like I passed out for 30 seconds because there was somehow, I don't know. I really think I must have just missed a scene because from one moment to the next, Lucius went from battling to the death, in the ring, to suddenly being outside the city with the army. And I don't remember how he got out there, but I was so confused, and I really may have just like been focused on my popcorn or something. But I didn't understand how he's just suddenly got.
Oh, he just jumped on a horse.
And that was the action. Okay.
Yeah, he just jumped on a horse and rode after Macrinus.
Sweet. Okay. Very good.
As one does.
As one does.
Jumps on said horse.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure if we started thinking about all the scenes, we could certainly do a little bit more damage, but
we could. And again, like we say all the time on this podcast, it's incredible that a movie like this even gets made.
Yeah.
So to everybody who is part of this movie, you are fantastic, and we're not taking anything away from you.
100%. This, I hope and expect this to be at least nominated for an award for its production design and wardrobe. Like, absolutely beautiful work. Like,
oh yes,
just incredible. I was floored. All the props, all the sets looked amazing, immaculate, as Ridley Scott always does. Like whoever he works with is always going to be the top of their game. And so I was, floored. I believed everything I saw on screen.
And the compositing of the Colosseum, the water scene with the boats, the scene at the beginning where the boats are attacking the city, which is backed up to the water as the boats crash into the wall. Like, so cool, man. It looked super real. I was in it. I was engaged. I really thought that was happening. It was, I agree with you 100%. I think that it should get some awards there. I think that not having Hans in this really hurt it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and I wanted to hear that motif. I wanted to hear that main theme, and I heard little bits of it, but never got it full on. I want it front and center at the very beginning of the movie and at the very end, and maybe a few times throughout. I want that theme the whole time. And I never really got it. And so it felt like a totally different story, but they were trying to pull in so many aspects from the first one that it just felt like they were stealing almost instead. And I don't know why they strayed away from it. Maybe it was Maybe they couldn't use the theme for some weird reason. I wouldn't know why. Why would you not? Why would you not use that?
As much as they took from the first film between clips and, characters and rearranging storylines, why not take the music at that point? Like, you're taking everything else, like, just make it.
And let me be clear. The reason isn't because it's necessarily like familiar and you're just regurgitating the same thing. The reason is because 90% of the emotion that you get from the first one is because of, not 90%, but a lot of the reason you get the emotion you get, half of it, is because of the music. Because the music happening, when you hear that woman singing, when you hear that and you see the hand going through the wheat, or you see Maximus's face, longing for his wife, you feel their love, even though you never see them together. And it's, I get verklempt just thinking about it. So why wouldn't you use that? Because the whole point in making something like this is to ensue emotion.
Yeah.
That's it. So use the emotional parts, and that's okay to do that. You're not stealing, you're not like regurgitating something because it has a purpose to doing it. Not, so using the music would have helped a lot, and I just never really got that.
Well done. Yeah. So what are you going to recommend this week?
Well, we talked about it before I got on here, and I'm just going to recommend it. You're typing in it already. I'm going to recommend the Arcane documentary that's out on YouTube called Bridging the Rift. I think there's like 5 episodes or so, and it's about 30 minutes long each. It's almost as good, if not better, than the show itself, which I am in a tailspin on the interwebs about right now. But the documentary, it's not only insightful, but it's gut-wrenchingly inspiring. If you're just looking for something to be inspired by people who didn't know what the hell they were doing when they started this stuff, but didn't stop until they made something that they thought was going to be they thought was perfect, it is a great watch. And you recommended it to me a long time ago, and I just never dived into it until recently, and it's just it's amazing. So yeah, Arcane, Bridging the Rift on YouTube.
Well done. I'm going to recommend an old Ridley Scott film. It was one of the only thing I was really looking forward to was seeing Denzel in a Ridley Scott movie. I don't think he's ever done a Ridley Scott film. Denzel used to do a lot of films with Ridley's brother, Tony. And so I was really excited just about seeing him work with Ridley. But there's older films that Ridley's done that are still magical to me. His early work with Tom Cruise, for instance, a little film called Legend. When I was a kid, this movie was a huge inspiration to me. I was just enthralled. And if you've never seen Legend, like, it's such a fun, interesting, beautiful movie. It probably moves a lot slower now than it did back then. It really takes its time, and it's very poetic. And so go in with some patience in mind, grab a big bowl of popcorn, and just turn the lights out and really enjoy the visual feast and some of the emotional elements because it's such a cool project. So even though Gladiator II didn't work, Ridley Scott is still one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. And probably, I would imagine I've never seen anyone else's work more in a theater. Like, I've seen probably 90% of Ridley Scott's films in a theater. And it's so cool. Every time that he's still making films, he's a big inspiration for sure. So Legend, go check that out. And stay tuned for next week. It's episode 300, and you know what that means on the ones and twos. We always do. Maybe for the last time, we're going to cover our favorite film, Interstellar. And this one's a really cool one. So we've done some amazing, every guest we've had, I will say, kills it. We've never had a whack guest, and I'm super excited about that. And we've had some professionals step into our show, and that's just been incredibly, insightful, and like we get geeked out every time. Like we had Hamish come on last year and talk about his work with like Drew Goddard, and that was just so cool. And then we've had my friend and actor Trent Moore come on, talk about No Country for Old Men and his work with the Coen brothers and Deacons and all those kinds of stories. And, one of our favorite episodes has been Chris and Cassie coming on to talk about Blade Runner 2049. That's a legendary episode for us, and one that we talk about all the time. And there was someone else that worked on Blade Runner 2049, little guy named Hans Zimmer. And so we got to talk to one of his digital instrument creators, Raul Vega. He joins us to talk about Interstellar and working with Hans and being a composer and his work in the field and what he's trying to do with his career, and talk about inspirational. Man, talking to Raul was one of the greatest guest interviews we've had so far. And I don't know about you, Todd, but I left that interview feeling super inspired.
Definitely. I don't think that we can do Interstellar again. I'm just going to say it. Unless we get Nolan or Hans themselves on the podcast. I just don't think that there's anything else to talk about now. I think that we've run the gamut. And speaking with Raul, he's just such a gracious, like unassuming guy, who, yeah, by the way, I got Hans on my cell phone. I could call him anytime or whatever. Worked with him for 12 years, but you would never know. He's not like he doesn't name drop, and he's just very unassuming and calm and loving and just really a wonderful individual. And it was just so great to talk to him. We could have talked to him all day.
Yeah,
really, it could have. And at one point, I think we said, "Dude, if you don't stop, we're not going to stop." So we just had to call it, say, okay, we'll leave you alone now. It was wonderful.
Attack, man. He's got a lot of interesting insights and things to say about the industry and scoring and music and building a career. Like, it was really cool talking about being inspired, like to see how he got started working at Remote Control Studios for Hans. It's not what you would think. Like, talking about figuring it out as you go. Raul has got a lot to say about that. So yeah, definitely get geeked up for next week's episode. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, drop us a review. If there's something you want us to talk about, kind of things you find interesting, let us know. And if you want to comment on this episode in particular, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Gladiator II, the number.
And our quote of the day is from the great George Lucas. The technology keeps moving forward, which makes it easier for the artists to tell their stories and paint the pictures they want.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool aspect of where we're headed. But at the same time, it does make me a little bit afraid of, if you can get it into production super fast, does that kind of wipe out some of the discipline of understanding the story you're trying to tell and what's absolutely necessary? Like, whenever you can do it all and then you do it all, sometimes you end up with too much cloth instead of just the outfit you're trying to make, just the story you're trying to tell, and nothing else. We need to find that balance of, okay, it's great that we can now have all these tools and we can tell our stories, but also don't forget to just tell your story. And I feel like we're getting worse and worse at that as we're getting all these tools.
That's a great point. I mean, I the only thing I'll say to that is that what I've kind of like learned over the last few years is that there's a difference, and we've talked about it on this cast before. There's a difference between storytelling and content creation, right? A story is not content. A story is more substantial. Content is something, like a Instagram post or something like that. Like, that's content. What we're talking about on this podcast and what we try to make or like differentiate between content and actual, film or actual storytelling. Right? It's not that content can't also be storytelling, but there's a difference. Content, you make it fast, you put it out there, and that's it. But You know, when you talk about something like a film like Gladiator II or Gladiator I or Interstellar or Arcane, you know, it is a story. It is it's an emotional feeling that you're trying to convey, not just putting stuff out there because it's that time of the week to post or something, which, God damn it, I hate. I just can't stand it. I violently, viscerally don't like it. And I think that the technology allows us to do that kind of thing. So to your point, it's really important to understand that it's just because you can do it fast and cheap doesn't mean that's the thing to do. You know, sometimes it is. Sometimes, man, I got $50. I got to throw it to somebody on Fiverr to make this thing because I don't know how to make this, but I really think that if we have this thing, it'll make a difference in the thing that I'm making. Okay, great. And we are living in an age where you can do that, where there, you know, and that's so wonderful and great. But you know what? Go spend that $50. You know, go do the thing that you need to do to create the thing that gets the emotion out there. And it's wonderful that technology allows us to do that now. Just make sure that it's you know, that you use it for good.
Yeah.
I would say. Anyway. Oh, what wonderful, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. We'll see if it lands with people. I don't know. Everybody's singing praises of Gladiator II. It's okay to go against the grain, I think.
I hope.
Yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Please like and subscribe us wherever you get your podcasts. Review us. Reviews make a huge difference for us. And if there's a film that you'd like to see us kind of pick apart or talk about, we'd love to hear from you. Maybe we'll do it one day. Who knows? Until next time, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.